Hello, and welcome to Unity Church on the Mountain from my home. The title of the talk today will be The Peace of Truth. But let's begin by affirming together our opening statement. There is only one presence and one power in my life and the universe, God. Taking a deep breath, we inhale life, and as we exhale, we relax into this moment. One more deep and holy breath. Let us affirm together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Leave us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. So the title of the talk is The Peace of Truth. Last week, the challenge for the week was to become aware when we are waiting. And then to make that into a spirit break, to just become aware of the present. And then realize that when we're aware of the present, we are no longer waiting. Waiting is something that happens in the ego mind and is in anticipation of some future event. Whereas when we are in the peace of truth, we are in this moment. We are not in the past or in the future, only now. And there is no waiting. So let's think about our daily practice now for just a moment. Maybe you have had the opportunity to practice centering prayer or mindfulness within the framework even of affirmative prayer. So I'd like you to go now with your consciousness to one of those moments when you discovered that you were in the midst of following a train of thoughts. The thoughts will come, and we observe them going in the same way they come. But sometimes, maybe oftentimes, we find that we have begun to follow these thoughts. Maybe even go into a daydream where we are lost in these thoughts. But there comes a moment when we become aware that we have followed a thought or a thought pattern, and we let go. I want to recall to consciousness what it feels like at that moment when we let go. We had been in the process of following a thought. We become aware and we release. Without judgment, we just let go. What is that like? Is there a feeling in the body? Is there a certain experience of being that is unique to this moment? I believe that each of us is going to have a slightly different experience of this, maybe even vastly different. It could be on the order of tuning in a black and white TV versus tuning in a color TV. There could be a certain vividness to that experience as we shift from this ego thought train to the peace that happens in that moment when we become aware and shift to center. There is this certain peace. It may be described as that journey from head to heart. It's only natural as a human being to follow these thoughts. I mean, if after all, it's what we've done for most of our waking life. The exercise is in becoming aware and moving back to center. So every time that we follow these thoughts, we have an opportunity. We have the opportunity to become aware and to move back to center and experience the peace of truth as we move from head into heart. Heart. Heart is a word that is often used in various connotations. We might be speaking of a physical pump that pumps the blood throughout our bodies, nourishing our cells and sustaining life. When we see a heart on a Valentine's card or in a Hallmark card, maybe it's referring to something even different. It has the connotation of an emotion, a feeling, a sympathy. When we speak of moving from head to heart, we're speaking somewhat in the terms of a pump, but we're really hardly speaking about the passions, the emotions that are involved with the other connotation of heart. Though these passions are certainly present. So what are we talking about? So, heart. There's an organization called the HeartMath Institute that studies this relationship between the head and the heart. Brain activity can be measured. That energy that is transmitted from our brain, our physical cells, the nerve cells themselves, can be measured. It's called an EKG. You see the little needle move. That's the indication of what's going on there. In the same way that there is an electromagnetic field that emanates from the brain as we think, there is an electromagnetic field that emanates from the heart. This can also be measured. And here's the thing. The brain electromagnetic field is localized around the head. If you go very far from it, you can't pick it up against the background noise of electromagnetics. But the heart electromagnetic field resonates and radiates so much more strongly that it can be picked up much further away from our body. And it is a consciousness. Did you know that there are nerve cells on the heart, very similar to the nerve cells that are in the brain? That the heart actually does think with its own consciousness. The heart is the center of the coordination of our whole body being. The feedback, the control mechanism. But what else is the heart? The heart is our center for spiritual perception. Our heart is our center for spiritual perception. Our master teacher Jesus told us about this. It's written down in the book of Matthew in chapter 5 and verse 8. It's very simple. I'm reading from the Lambda translation, from the original Aramaic. And we read, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Seeing. How often do we think of our heart as an organ for perception, as an organ for seeing the presence of God? Blessed are the pure in heart. This is a statement that's gotten a connotation that I see as being different from what was intended in the original statement. It has taken on some externally observable, moralistic interpretation. Pure. Think about, just take it completely out of context, and what does the word pure mean? Think about water. If I have a bottle of pure water, what have I got? I have a bottle that contains nothing but water. It's pure water. If I am pure of heart, I am experiencing a oneness of heart. There is only heart. Unified consciousness. Remember, the heart is what brings us together as a whole. There is only heart. And when I am in this space of only heart, I perceive Spirit. I perceive God. I perceive truth. And there are other things that come with that. Things like compassion. When we are in that state of being pure of heart, we don't have to bring about compassion. It is part of who we are at that time. It is our being. Love, big love, unconditional love is a part of our being. The peace of truth, that pure peace, is a part of our being. Joy, the experience of joy, is part of existing within that experience that is this purity of heart. It's part of seeing God. And where do we see God? We see God within us and everywhere else, in everyone we meet and in everything. I can remember being handed a book of poems that my grandmother, Grandma Isley, wrote. And she talks in these poems about her experience of God. And one of these beautiful poems, I'm not going to quote it or read it, but it talks about seeing God in the beauty of nature. We experience God in everything because there's nowhere where God is not. It is beautiful. So we have this consciousness that is centered in our heart, that is capable of perceiving and thinking. I want to relate to you a story. Cynthia Bourgeault shares this story in a talk that I have shared this morning on my Facebook. So if you'd like to hear the full talk, it's there. But she relates a story about a heart transplant. You see, that's what I meant by that. It's not just a metaphor. Our heart is that pump, and it's that pump, that physical part of us, that is that center of our being. And it has its consciousness. It's not just an idea of it. It really has it. And that's what this story demonstrates. So there was a woman who was an organ donor. And she was violently raped and killed. And her heart was then transplanted into the body of a young woman. And it's through the remembrances that this young woman had that they were able to find and convict that murder rapist. It wasn't just a pump. The heart is so much more. The physical heart is so much more than just a pump. I'm feeling the God bumps as I even think about this. We have within us that capability of experiencing the peace of God as we move our consciousness to this state of heart coherence that HeartMath has been able to measure. It's science. It's spirituality. It is the coming together of these two things that are often thought of as being vastly apart. This peace is an inner peace. It is a certain stillness. It's not some of these other things that come with that word peace. I know to some Vietnam veterans and other veterans, peace is an anti-war demonstration. But that's not the peace of truth. When we have that peace of truth in our consciousness, when we experience that state of being that is the peace of truth, there is a change in our energy, and it radiates out into this universe, and it affects the peace of those around us. It can be measured scientifically. It can be measured in us, and you can see the change in others around us as they are measured. I'll find one of these videos on the HeartMath site, and I'll share it in the next newsletter. There have been experiments that have been repeated that show that if I am sitting at a table and you are sitting at a table and we both go into this heart coherent state that I'm calling the peace of truth, that there can be two other people sitting at the same table who are just sitting there like bumps, having whatever thoughts they are thinking, and their heart coherence level will arise. Their head and heart will come into a more coherent state. And they do nothing at all. It is only the act of you and I moving into this state that radiates out and resonates with the being of these other two people. I think it's wonderful. I think it's the hope of mankind. Christ in you, your hope of glory, our hope of glory. That perfect presence that is within all of us is our hope of glory. I want to share a song with you. But before I do, I'd like to start by a small challenge. So as you practice your centering prayer, or your mindfulness, or your affirmative prayer, whatever it is that you use as your devotional time, notice what it feels like in that moment when you become aware of your thoughts and you move back to center. Don't think about it, and especially don't think about it while you're actually in the meditation. Because as soon as you think about what does this feel like, it feels so good, it's gone, and we're back in thought again about it. So just enjoy it in the moment, feel it in the moment, and then later on, bring it back to memory. Okay. This song is written by James Francis Twyman. It is used by his express permission. It is called Lesson 188 because it comes from Lesson 188 in A Course of Miracles. A more apt title might be The Peace of God. I share it now as a meditation, as an opportunity to become still, to bring that observer into the consciousness. And observe what? Observe those thoughts. And when inevitably that consciousness that we call the ego consciousness begins to follow those thoughts or even daydream, to become aware of it and move back to the center that I'm calling the peace of truth, the peace of God, the peace of love. The peace of God shining in me now. The peace of God shining in me now. The peace of God shining in me now. The peace of God is shining in me now. The peace of truth 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 is shining in me now. The peace of love 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 is shining in me now. The peace of God 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 is shining in me now. 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 The peace of God 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 is shining in me now. Thank you. Let us affirm together our prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. I am the light. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love. The power of God protects us. I am the power. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence. Wherever I am, God is, and all is well. Thank you for listening. Thank you for saying yes to Spirit and bringing these practices into your life, because it works if you work it.